quality of site preparation can make or break your re-veg project. In this video, we'll walk you through the key tips to good site preparation, including weed control and ground preparation such as ripping and mounding.
So today we're at a beautiful property in Boyanup, and we're just going to walk you through some key principles for successful revegetation along the waterway here. If you come to a site like what you see behind me, the first thing to consider is what type of surface preparation the site might need to help establish plants. So ideally you would get weed control done first to the point where you can reduce this biomass of weeds you see behind me to essentially bare soil, so you have a nice medium to plant into. There's various ways to do that. So first thing we'd probably do is look at either slashing it. In this situation we'd probably use like just a brush cutter, because you can't really get a mower and a slasher in there. So we'd probably just brush cut the drain, and then we'd follow up with some blanket application of herbicide use. In this situation, when you have basically just 100% kikuyu, you can just use a knockdown herbicide. Being in the waterway, you probably want to look at this one, Weedmaster Duo, which is just a lower rate glyphosate. So it's a 360. I wouldn't recommend using the 540, which is a higher dose glyphosate in this situation near the waterway. Essentially, you just need to use a backpack sprayer to knock them down. So yeah, brush cut first, then look at your blanket application of weed control. You could use a backpack, this type of backpack sprayer for this situation, because it's a relatively small site, and you could just basically just wave the hand wand along, just getting a nice even application. When you're doing a knockdown herbicide like glyphosate, you don't need to spray it on heavily, you can just mist it on. You don't want to be using too much chemical. And then we've also got this one here, which is probably better for this situation. So it's just a battery operated one, so you just get a more even application coming out of the nozzle, and you don't have to physically pump it as well. So that helps, but either option's really good. If you're looking at a bigger site, or if this drain did continue down for a few kilometres and you had good access, you'd probably want to look at using a spray unit. So we just have a quick spray dual hose quick spray unit. Holds about 400 litres of water, and within each tank you can cover at least a hectare, if 1 to 2 hectares, depending on the rate and the type of weeds that you're targeting. It's important to tackle weed control before planting to essentially reduce the competition for the native plants that you're putting in. So if you're planting, well, one, it's going to make it really difficult to plant. If you've got all the roots, your stolons of the kikuyu and all the leaves running through, you basically could not get good compaction, good planting quality. Also, if you're trying to plant in weeds like this, they're going to take all the nutrients and the moisture out of the soil, and really just smother the seedlings when they're trying to establish. So we try to get the sites down to basically bare soil to have a nice medium to plant into. Once we've identified what weeds are at the site, we sort of determine the approach to controlling them. So we've got a variety of techniques to do that. Certain systemic herbicides are important for plants that have underground root systems, that essentially annual plants that come up in the winter. You don't see them in the summer, but they survive in the summer through their rhizomes. They'll re-emerge in the winter months if you don't spray them with a systemic herbicide. We use chlorsulfuron in that situation, which is quite handy because it's a semi-selective herbicide, meaning it won't kill other native plants in the area. Sometimes if you're doing pre-planting weed control and there's a small amount of native plants in the area you don't want to kill, you can use selective herbicides. So there's a few examples here. This is Kentril, Lontril. So basically this one will just kill broadleaf weeds. Again, it's a semi-selective, so we do treat it like a knockdown herbicide. We do try to avoid other natives in the area when using this, but most natives it won't actually kill if you accidentally have a little bit of spray hitting the native plant. This one here, this haloxifop is really handy. It's a grass selective herbicide. So we find if we did have a few remnant plants in this situation coming through along the drain that we wanted to retain, you can spray this one over the top. It will only kill things in the Poaceae family, so only kill grasses. So this one's extremely handy tool for us to use in revegetation work. The best time to start your pre-planting weed control is definitely at least the winter before, if not prior to that. So you want as many good knockdowns as possible to reduce the weed seed bank and essentially get that site down to bare earth to make it plantable. So different weeds germinate at different times of the year. Obviously you get a lot of your winter broadleafs coming through. Winter you get your summer weeds, so a lot of things like stinkwort, your melons. That's why seasonal weed control is so important. And there's different herbicides and different weed control techniques. Woody weeds, you're obviously best to control them before they set seed. They tend to set seed a little bit earlier, so it can be early spring where they'll have mature seed. So if you can remove any woody weeds through winter and early spring, identify the summer weeds and how to control them in the summer months when they're actively growing, and obviously your winter broadleafs and your grasses. That's probably best done in winter.
One of the most recognisable and problematic weeds you can find here in southwest WA is the arum lily. You can often find them in damp areas, forming dense clumps as you can see here in this waterway. It was originally introduced from South Africa as a garden plant, but has now established itself as a highly invasive weed. Arum lilies spread through both seed and through tuber fragments left in the soil, making them really tricky to control. Only spray the intended plants to avoid harm to off-target native species. Arum lilies can also be physically removed, but make sure to get all root fragments from the ground to prevent any regrowth. You'll have to come back over multiple years to get on top of regrowth, and depending on what you started with, it may take a few seasons before you completely eradicate the species. Make sure you contact your local biosecurity group for advice on controlling the weed species found in your area.
Fire's an option for weed control, I guess because it helps build up the carbon matter in the soil, and we don't often use fire because it's hard to get the permits to actually do the burning. But yeah, sometimes we'll burn the site essentially just to stimulate like weed germination. So that's where it can be a really effective tool. Not often because it's difficult for approvals, but certainly something that can be looked at. In a situation like this on a rural property, it's probably not a bad idea. And even if you had material that you cut back woody weeds, you can put it in little burn piles across the site. And then we quite often find that because of the carbon matter and the organic build-up after it's been burnt, you get quite good success, especially broadcasting seed or planting seedlings around areas that have previously been burnt. For people that don't want to use herbicides, there's a few other options. One of those is what we call solarisation, and probably a really good option. Again, you want to do it well ahead of time, but you can either lay out black plastic or weed matting, and that will just cook the weeds over a period of time. So if you can lay it out over the summer months and pin it down with something, you can use like just ground pins, old fence posts, whatever you have. Just make sure it's pinned down and laid down properly. You probably want to have it on the ground for 2, 3, 4 months in the summer months when there's a hot, moist environment, essentially cook the weeds underneath. And you retain all that organic matter in the soil, which is one of the benefits. Another technique for pre-planting weed control might be to, once you've actually reduced the weed levels, is to scalp out a small amount of topsoil. You don't want to go too heavy on your scalping because you'll basically reduce all the good topsoil, but you want to skim off enough where you'll reduce the weed seed bank. So we generally say 30 to 50 mil is enough to retain enough topsoil. We don't really use scalping unless we're direct seeding sites and we really need to reduce the weed burden. You want to take a conservative approach with scalping. In this environment here, it could probably lead to erosion, so it's probably not the best practice unless you had a very high weed load like kikuyu or buffalo grass. Once you've got control of your weeds and you've got the site down to essentially bare soil, a good option is to rip the ground. You can have it, if it's a big site, sometimes we have it on the back of a big loader or a grader. multi-ripping tines, even a small tractor. A situation like this might be the farmer, it might be a single tine, but it's important to break the compaction of the ground to allow your plant's roots to grow down easily into the soil. It also helps aerate the soil and improves the moisture penetration.
When planning your rip lines, make sure you pay attention to the contour of your site. Rip lines that are parallel to the contour won't allow for drainage, whereas if they're too steep, they're likely to cause erosion issues. Plan for a slope of 1% or less, or a maximum drop of 1 metre every 100 metres. A laser level can help you plan your rip line, or you can plan them manually using a contour map of your site. When using a contour map of 2 metre resolution, you would need a minimum distance of 200 metres between contour lines to achieve a 1% slope. Avoid continuing rip lines over natural drainage lines that run into your creek. It can be a good idea to come back over your rip line with a vehicle to put those good clumps of topsoil back in the ground and retain some moisture. You want to avoid rip lines with a smooth edge, as roots will have trouble growing. This may happen if you are ripping wet or clay soils.
So just a few tips when ripping. First of all, put your tractor in four-wheel drive if you have a four-wheel drive tractor. Well, that'll prevent the rear wheels from slipping. Second tip is it's probably best to do a light rip on your first run, so don't drop the 3-point linkage too low. And then on your second run, drop it a bit lower, and on your third run, go as deep as you like. And the reason for that is you don't know what's under the ground. There could be rocks, there could be tree roots. So it's best to have a conservative approach and look after your equipment. And the third tip is for a nice even finish at the end, perhaps run over the rip line in line with your tractor tyres, and just replace any heavy sods either side before you do that, so you get a nice smooth finish.
In areas where you can't get big machinery to cultivate the soils, these handheld earth augers are really handy tools. For seedlings, small seedlings like cells or 50mm tubes, we tend to use a small auger like this. You get various size augers attached to it. It's a wood drill with an auger attachment on the end. I think this is a 90 or 100mm bit. You can get, I think it goes up to 120mm. So various sizes depending on the size of your plants. It's important with these to only really look at sandy sites. They hate clay. You can actually get clay cutting tips on the end of some augers, which is a stronger metal, and it's got a biting bit that actually pierces the clay and helps grip it. But these things tend to be under a little bit more pressure in clay soils or gravelly soils. In that case, you'd probably want to use a bigger auger, such as this one. I think that's a 200 or 250mm auger bit on the end. In extremely compacted soils, you'd use that. More rocky ground. Or if you've got bigger plants, that's where these things really come in handy. Sometimes we'll use these, we'll excavate the big hole with the bigger auger, and then we'll backfill it with compost. So if we need to improve the soil at the same time, that's when these come into play. Sometimes when you're using the augers, you'll have a lot of dead weeds if the ground hasn't been prepped up with a bigger machine. So the dead weeds can get bound up in the augers. So what we tend to do is have someone go ahead and just clear or scrape back the dead weeds and expose the bare soil before augering the hole. That will stop the augers getting bound up. Mounding's really important for areas that get inundated in winter with water. So if you have a big rainfall event and the water comes up, if the plants are underwater for too long, they essentially won't survive because of the lack of oxygen. So you want to rip and mound at the same time, and then plant on top of the mound to get the seedlings up and out of the water. Another option for sites that don't get inundated with water is to look at ripping and furrowing and planting in the bottom of the furrow, so then water will capture. So rainfall might be tailing off in the spring. You might get a rainfall event with a few mils. At least the water will go into the furrow, and also it actually protects the plant as it's establishing.
Good site preparation is one of the most important steps for the success of your project. Once you get on top of your weeds and you get good ground preparation, your plants are going to have the best chance of survival. Catch us in the next video, where we'll share some essential tips for a successful planting day.